guys? Welcome back to another episode of the 706 podcast. Our first episode of the new year is now 2021. We have left behind 2020 and all of its follies and traumas, and we slate's clean. We're moving forward, and like everything's going great. And I'm hoping it stays that way indefinitely, and we will see. All right. So today we are discussing 45 Years by Andrew Haigh from 2015. This is a realist film, a relationship drama about an aging couple going through some bit of a rough patch. And that's all I'll say for now. I'm sure the plot will kind of emerge as we discuss it. It's a very simple movie. There's not a whole lot to discuss in terms of its plot, but I'm very curious how you guys reacted to it. I'm actually going to start with Anthony today. I want to know what Anthony thought of 45 Years.
All right. So I have almost like a Tony-like criticism eventually for the movie. But before I get to it, I'm just going to say is I think this is a good movie. And I think therein lies the problem actually for me, is that it's merely a good movie. It's like there's no oomph to it. There's no, nothing extra. There's nothing spectacular. There's almost no emotion for me personally to kind of really rally behind as I kind of watch it. And what I see is almost this short story on the screen that feels perfectly crafted in like this MFA program. And it's put on the screen with like this great visionary eye, this great visual detail, and this great performances. And it just feels so stilted by the time I'm done with it. I think there's a moment, which is when the wife finds the carousel and it's slowly rotating, and we eventually see that the woman who died all those years ago was pregnant. That's a moment that should have been so much more interesting for someone like me. But by the time I got to it, I was just so emotionally uninvested because I just didn't care. I did not find that something extra, that's something I can't put a name to, that really, made that moment work or hit harder than it probably should. And it probably does for a lot of people. But to me, it just wasn't there. And I think one of my big things about the movie is I just don't see the transformation take place by the time she fully confronts him in that moment when they're in the room and she tells him, like, I think I was good enough for you, which is this great line. And it's like actually beautiful to see performed and probably beautiful to read on the screenplay page. But I don't know. It's to me, it's the question of, well, what happened and how was their relationship for these 45 years altogether? Was it the same stilted kind of, dynamic between the two of them? Because to me, there's this sort of loss of tragedy of that sort of realization going on. What's happening? It doesn't do much. And I'll probably have more cogent thoughts as we kind of talk things through. I'm still kind of puzzling it out. I just saw it. So
Okay.
We'll go from there.
Sure. Okay. I can see what you're saying. And let's go to Connor next.
Hey, everybody. I'm Connor. You didn't introduce us, Tony. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, no. Anthony. That was a failure. I am Tony. That was Anthony, and this guy is Connor. There you go.
This is always fun.
Just as I gather my thoughts. I mean, I think I'm in a similar boat to Anthony. I respect it. I respect the craft. I respect the subtlety of the acting. I respect the topic that's been chosen. I respect the way it respects us as an audience. Doesn't give us a whole lot to work with. We can fill in the blanks. We can understand, right? We're interested in learning what's going on, right? There's no melodrama, right? It's subtle. I like all of this. I just think ultimately something was missing from the movie. It felt kind of cold. I couldn't quite, felt like there just wasn't a lot there ultimately. And I think the main critique I would make is just that to me dramatically, and like I said, I don't think we always need to have a structure. I don't think, these things help. But I felt that it was lacking, right, in the sense that there's no kind of middle. Really, like the whole thing basically proceeds from as soon as he says, right, as soon as our husband character, Tom Courtenay, says, well, okay, she's been found, right, this ex-girlfriend, right, in the Alps, and she's been frozen, right? Obviously, this is this very lurid, almost fantastic image, right, that seems to say a lot, right? We understand the threat of this and the meaning of this, right, instantly. It's kind of a symbol, right? Someone frozen in time, right, et cetera, right? Someone who never got to grow old with you, right? Someone who will appear perfect, right? And basically, that's it. The movie can then just end there, right? Basically, this is discovered, he's obsessed, she's upset that he's obsessed, right? And that's kind of it. I guess that would be a critique. But I have to admit that in my experience of watching it, one of the things that I didn't like about it was just my pure emotional reaction to it, which was exhausted pain, and kind of reflecting on the fact that like human minds work in this way and how sad that is and how little hope there is, which, might be me bringing too much, but I can say that in that sense, it is effective. It is effective in that sense, but somehow I could have used some more variety to make this sink into my mind as a story to be told.
Okay.
It's my take.
Sure. All right. And Kirk, I'm going to have you round us out, and I'm hoping for a Spring Breakers-esque salvo here that rescues us, that rescues this episode. But we'll see. No pressure.
No, I mean, I definitely have some qualms, but I think this is a good movie. It's a beautiful film. It's well shot. It's well written. It's well acted. It really does well with kind of luring us in with negative space, negative energy, the absence of drama or the absence of dialogue. I think that Anthony and Tony or Connor's points are well taken. Yeah, well, first off, I'd say any film that's supported by a lottery, you always know it's going to be a certain type of film. It's like, I wonder, is Powerball ever going to start supporting films? Is that going to happen? Because we could get some real bangers in the U.S. But, yeah, it's one of those films where it's like 8 title cards, and you kind of know the vibe you're going to get. And it's a little heavy on the metaphor. It's a little heavy throughout. Actually, with Connor said he felt like there wasn't too much they gave us. I feel like they gave us too much, not in the sense of backstory, but in the moment to moment. I feel like every kind of innuendo or angle presentation had kind of a prescriptive meaning that we were supposed to take from it. And in that way, you kind of feel a little confined as a viewer. You feel a little railroaded. And it's almost like you're being guided where you maybe want to explore the relationship a little bit more. I think where the film thrives is in those scenes, the bedtime chat scenes. Those were probably the best scenes for me, where we're kind of allowed to explore the past, his understanding of the past. She's kind of deciphering it with him, and we're able to see just how much of this past love has, it's kind of carried forward into their marriage. I will say, for me, I've never been married. I've never been married for 45 years, but I've been around couples that have been married for quite a long time. And I think they nailed the kind of the banality of the day to day with a marriage of that length. What I don't necessarily believe, or it did ring true initially, but towards the end, I was kind of like sighing or shrugging a little bit, is that this wife would be so hung up on this. It's almost like she is behaving, or she is responding as if they've been dating for 6 months and not been married for 45 years. She's woefully insecure. I mean, my goodness. If you've been married for 45 years, you understand compromise. You understand the ugly histories and the muddy circumstances and ugly truths of coming into a marriage, and the secrets that are revealed. And it's even exacerbated by the fact that they don't have kids, because oftentimes kids can give couples a uniform purpose and can kind of distract from these issues that maybe will resurface once the kids leave for college or whatever. So you're telling me they spent all this time together, and this Katya was never really discussed any further for 45 fucking years? Are you serious? So that's where it's on paper, but the pretense almost is exhausting. So I wonder if anybody else felt that way. And the ending kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because to further that point, it's implied that there's been some irrevocable damage done to this relationship, to this marriage. She pulls her hand down kind of in defiance at the end. She's given what her girlfriend tells her is going to happen. There's this emotional catharsis from the husband. He kind of prostrates himself before her in front of all their friends, says it was the best choice I ever made to marry you. And she's not satisfied by that. She's not satisfied with that. I think that was the lesser of two evils, because the other option would have been just happily ever after. So I think they did have to kind of choose that path, but that might have just been an issue with the foundation of the movie itself. As far as mechanically speaking, I think, like I said, it's a little heavy on the metaphor. You know, you look at like the scene, the second time she's looking at watches, and just this shot, she's looking at Swiss watches, and you can hear the ticking of the watches, and in the background you hear bells tolling, and it's like, dude, it's a little on the nose, guys. Like, we know you went to film school, okay? Like, calm the fuck down, okay? That's the problem I have with these A24, you know, versions. And this movie goes for the naturalistic, but it lacks that human drama, that moment to moment, you know, ineffable quality that we get when people are expressing emotions. And it's because they're talking about things that have happened years and years ago. It's very stilted, but at the same time, I think that's what they were going for. So it's like, did it work for me? Ultimately, I'm complaining a lot, but I would say I enjoyed this movie. I just think it's an imperfect movie, and I think the basic pretense of the movie is flawed. So anyways, I'm going to be more favorable moving forward. I just had to get that stuff off my chest, so go ahead.
Okay, that's interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like you guys, you all made distinct points, but it sounds like you're roughly in the same ballpark, or roughly in the same neighborhood. I don't think any of you straight up said it's like bad, but kind of like more respect than like. You were kind of kept a foot away from it, and I understand that. I'll say, first of all, and I probably should have maybe led with this, but the basic, what this movie is, or the plot of this movie is extremely minimal. It can be summarized in like one or two sentences. And basically, Tom Courtenay's character, Jeff, the husband, receives a letter indicating that the body of his former lover, Katya, was discovered in Switzerland. And the movie basically is about Kate. It's about them both, but it centers on Kate, and it's about how they kind of deal with that, and kind of the opening up of these old wounds, and how you kind of deal with the idea that you were the second choice, right? So this movie is very minimal, both in terms of its plot and in terms of its presentation. It's very simple. It's a very stripped down, simple story told in a simple and stripped down way. In a way, it reminds me of kind of like some movies we've talked about before, like Anomalisa and Manchester by the Sea, or basically takes this very simple human sad thing and kind of examines it at feature length. And those are movies that I liked initially, and I've kind of cooled on over the years, but this is one that I think, to me, works, because I think that, well, yes, Connor makes the point that the movie doesn't really have a whole lot of meat on the bone in terms of its plot. Like, once we have the inciting incident, and I think, Kirk, you made this point too, there's not a whole lot of places the movie can really go. You know, the end of the movie, it's like, okay, like, well, what do you do? It's like a binary. Like, do they stay together? They split up? You know, where do you take a story like this? But I think that Andrew Haigh gets a lot of mileage out of this idea in terms of just sitting with these characters, sitting in that moment, sitting in this tension. I think there's an incredible amount of tension from the beginning of this movie. You know, from the moment that letter is read, you just feel this, like, you just feel something. You just feel like a shift in the air. And each day, it's told in a series of days. You know, they'll see a title card that'll say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It goes like, I think it's Monday through Friday. And each day brings a new horrifying development, a new kind of ratchet effect, which the noose is tightening basically on their relationship. And there is a feeling of inevitability to it, which is paralleled by the repeated references to climate change. I believe it's implied that the ice melted, and that's why she is now seen. And Jeff says, oh, I need to get a book on climate change. And you feel it kind of reference out the movie. So there's that idea of this inevitable kind of disintegration, this inevitable destruction that we're watching take place. And at times, it feels like a horror movie. In particular, I'm thinking of the sequence Anthony alluded to where she goes up into the loft. The loft is this intensely symbolic area, right? It's where we put away, the old trash, the old junk, the things we don't want to have to deal with. And the dog is barking. And it's like in a horror movie, the dog barks because the house is haunted. The dog's like, don't go up there. And we're saying, I'm watching it on the couch with my girlfriend. We're like, don't go up there. Why would you go up there? You're not going to find anything good up there. And she can't help herself. She just has to do it. She has to see. She can't stop it. It's the same way she asks, would you have married her if she hadn't died? It's like, why would you ask that question, right? You're not going to like the answer. And I think that sequence in particular is amazing. I think it's just the way we only see a corner of the images. We see her face, just the emphasis on her face, and just let Charlotte Rampling's face do the work as she's reacting to these images, I think is an incredibly tense scene. And I think that the reveal of the pregnancy, I don't know, for me, especially on the first screen, that was like a big jolt. That was a big oh my God, there's no coming back from this. And there's a series of moments that there's just no coming back from. And to me, the heart and soul of this movie is just seeing her try to hold it together and deny what is happening around her. She desperately tries to be okay with what is happening or with what has happened, like when she says, I can scarcely be mad at you for something that happened before we met, but we all know that's not really the issue. The issue is that he minimized it and didn't really talk about it. And as far as its kind of formal qualities, I mean, yes, there's a lot of long takes. There's a very kind of light touch where the camera will kind of move and kind of pan between the characters. I think my main observation on this viewing list for what the movie does that I think is kind of clever is in these more intense emotional conversations, like when they're in bed together, having these conversations about Katya, you very rarely see a two shot or a shot where they're both in the frame together. You see it a couple times in the movie. And if I were more prepared, I would have written down every single moment that is. But I think the point stands that during their most intense conversations, generally they're framed one at a time. Or you might see Jeff out of focus in the foreground and her in the back and the emphasis on her face. I think this is a very effective technique and shows their isolation from one another. Their increasing isolation, their increasing distance. It's a little elementary. It's a little film school 101, but it works. I think it works for this movie. And the presentation is exactly what it needs to be to tell this story, right? And watching this movie, I never feel bored. I never feel listless because I feel that dread, that paralyzing dread that, Kate feels as it gets worse and worse. And I think Jeff feels it as well because he wants desperately to hold on to it. I think what I respond to emotionally in this movie is the fact that it is such a heartbreaking situation these people are forced into, right, by the arrival of this letter. And there's no good answer, and for both of them are in a terrible situation. I feel terrible for Jeff. He lost the love of his life in this horrible and traumatic way. And he did his best to move forward. And Kate, through no fault of her own, has been in this situation where she is with a man and she knows she's the second choice. And as for Kirk's criticism of he didn't really buy it, I buy it completely. I totally buy it. If you marry a person and your understanding is you are the love of their life, there is no person they would rather be with than you. And everything in your life comes from that understanding because she feels that way about him, right? We love each other more than any other person on earth. And then you discover after years that he always had another person that he would like more than you. That is horrible. That's so heartbreaking. That would devastate me.
This hasn't been discussed for 45 years.
He buried it in himself because that's the dark secret. The dark secret inside of him is that his wife is the second choice. And he knows if she knew that, she would leave him. And he needs to hold on to her because he's already lost once. I think that's completely emotionally coherent. I can totally buy that there are secrets in relationships.
Yes, there are, but it's so on the nose. I mean, I want to hear what Connor and Anthony, if they find it believable, because it just doesn't jive with me.
I think I'm willing to admit that it works on a narrative level, of course, but I think to Kirk's point, I think there's something there because one of the hard things for me about this is they went through, to me, something already extremely problematic and traumatic, which is that he had a diagnosis and nearly died 5 years before, which is what instigates the 45th anniversary as opposed to the 40th. And so it seems to me that is this really on a comparable level to something that all these things that you've gone through together? And when you're on your sort of deathbed like that, or you're close to it, I feel like that level of emotion is already in a realistic relationship, the way Kirk is thinking about it, I think that would equal, if not surpass, anything that happened way back in the past, which makes it hard for me to sort of buy that moment on Kirk's level. I think I'm willing to kind of just forgive and let the kind of relationship unfold, and I think it is sort of traumatic and tragic, as you're saying, though. But yeah, I'm kind of torn in between.
As for me, yeah, I mean, my mentality with this movie, and I think it's problematic, is like to try to fix the problem. How can I fix this relationship, or what would I do differently, right? I think it would be better if Kate, right, understood this as a kind of, end of life sort of crisis, a kind of crisis of meaning and nostalgia, the unfreezing of the ice, like of this impending doom, kind of makes you think about these things, right? It would make sense that he would be kind of obsessed with it as part of his lost youth, and they could talk about that, right? I think you could get over the fact that, yes, okay, she was the one, right? I think the other thing, right, is the problematic aspect that, I think the worst thing that Tom Courtenay's character does, right, is when his wife asks him, would you have married her? He just says, yes. And I guess it's the honest answer, right? She was pregnant at the time too, right? It makes sense. This was the plan. But the fact that, right, and I guess this is, of course, the tragedy, they don't talk about it, they don't verbalize it, they don't nuance this any further, right? I think, you would hope, right, that it would be possible, right, for the answer to be yes, and for it also to be okay for them to continue to be married, and they do love each other still, right? But you wish, I wish he had said something else, right? And I guess, this is not a critique of the movie, but that's just how I think about the relationship. And I think, I feel in general that the Jeff character, basically just is very antagonistic in a way, right? He just kind of does these silly things. I guess we get it, and I think Kate should be able to forgive him. But of course, yeah, we can understand why not. But, it's frustrating, right? I weep for mankind, when I think about how we tend to react in these situations, and I understand it. I don't think I would be better, but anyway, it's not really a critique, just more a comment.
I don't know. I think too, it's the element of like the counterfactual, right? And my girlfriend pointed this out as we watched. She's thinking, what does my life look like if that hadn't happened? If this woman hadn't fallen into this pit, a purely random, chaotic event with no cause, what would my life be like? I had built this whole life. It was just purely like, that's like a destabilizing, and it reminds me almost of like, this movie too reminds me of like the book, The Remains of the Day, which basically deals with the question of like, looking back on your life with the suspicion that it was misspent, or realizing that you spent your life in service of something that, had you known more at the outset, you would not have, and kind of blinding yourself along the way and staying on this path. And how do you deal with that? Which to me is one of the most human and one of the most painful. Like, I think to me, it's part of me. It's like, that's an anxiety of mine, right? That's an anxiety of like, that's a fear of mine, is like, getting towards the end of my life and realizing that I did the wrong thing, or I made the wrong choices, or like that to me is a very real anxiety. And if that's not a sin, because we have different, like, I won't go as far as say that's like a universal thing, because for some people, maybe that's not as like salient. Like maybe you have different anxieties, you have different fears, but like to me that this movie is like terrifying. There's a terror to this movie, and just the idea of like the inescapability for these people of this, like the idea that like, is there any way they could have avoided this? Is there any way they could negotiate this better? Right.
I think, the tragedy that you're pointing out too is, I think, one that's on the nose, and the clear one, which is that the tragedy is that she was the second choice. But isn't the real tragedy for her, isn't that she's necessarily just the second choice, but that by taking that position, she spent a life that was dictated by being the person who that first wife could have been. Because there's something sort of insidious throughout the movie, that she's sort of the double of that woman. She might look like her when she was younger. She was also, like, I think, studying something similar or whatever. There's all these kind of parallels and matches to the original girl. Yeah, and what really gets her and what breaks her is we get that kind of emotional catharsis when, like, she tells him, I was more than enough. But what really breaks her apart is when she sees the photos of when she's young, and the photos of their relationship together. And to her, it's a question of this whole amount of time spent living a life dictated by being a different person than the person I could have been, as opposed to, I don't know, like the way he sees it, which I think is, I have me now and I have the person I wish I was then. And there's no sense to that 45 years. To her, that's what she sees. To him, he can't quite grasp that until that end, and she sees it as false.
And he might not even be aware that that's what he was doing. He may not even be conscious that that's what attracted him to her. He just says, like, when we met, oh, you were a knockout. You know, what makes someone a knockout? Because attraction is inherently subjective, right? Why are we drawn to the people we're drawn to? In part, it was probably because, you know, she reminded him of his dead lover, right? And that probably, like, that's like the inception of their relationship. That's the starting point of their relationship. How does that not make you question everything, or like on some level? Like, yeah, you can compartmentalize, as she tries to throughout the movie. You really see her try to be okay with it, but she finds that she's just not up to the task. It's not that she's this like shrewish, jealous woman. It's that it's like, this is a thing I can't not think about. I'm always going to be aware of this. There's no unknowingness, and that changes the relationship. Doesn't mean the relationship's going to end. It just means it's different. And that's scary, whether or not they should stay together or do stay together, which I think is a moment of ambiguity. I understand you kind of pointed out, Kirk, and I agree. This movie is not particularly ambiguous, as like we might call it subtle or muted or whatever, but in any given scene, there is kind of a very clear kind of intended meaning, an intended emotional, there's intended emotion being communicated to the audience in any given scene. I do think that ending, though, does leave some room for ambiguity in terms of like, where we move forward from here. You know, how do we deal with that? And I guess that's what I would say next is like, do you think there is a way forward for them? Do you think there is a way forward in this situation? Do you think the movie kind of gives us any sort of clues in either direction, or do you think that's kind of outside the scope of what's being conveyed here?
Well, the problem is not resolved, right? I mean, the last message communicated is no, she's not okay, right? And there's an irony to that. You know, because the husband has just tried to be he's trying to be better. He's going to make a conscious effort to never let this, come up again, right? But it'll always be there, and she won't forget about it, right? Which I don't know. To me, it feels unfair. To me, it feels. I'm starting to get, as I think about it. Though, of course, I understand where Kate's coming from. There's a little bit of a frustration.
A frustration with Kate for just not.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, but I guess you can't be really frustrated with people's emotions. But it's like, I think really if she just thought about it for a while, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess I wouldn't see quite the same issue. But of course, right, that's not her. I totally understand, how she feels, right?
This also, another thing too to bear in mind, I suppose, is the fact that this movie takes place over like 4 or 5 days. So that, who knows, maybe in like a few months, they would reach kind of a new equilibrium or a new understanding or something, and they would maybe could grow closer or something, right? Like that's left up in the air. But
just backtracking a little bit, I think the main flaw of this movie is it tries to allow the audience to empathize with something that it can't necessarily access. You cannot empathize with the marriage itself. You can empathize with the characters, but a 45-year marriage is not something that can be adequately accessed in the span of 96 minutes or whatever it is. So we come into it and it's this kind of sin of temporality. Like we feel these things, but you really need to, in order to truly grasp this marriage, like time, we're missing that element. And I know that's like one of the kind of, I guess, an allegory of the film is that, the ability for time to vanish, right? For great lengths of time to kind of be transmuted and found anew, and old ghosts are dragged up. And I get that. But at the same time, when you tick off those years of a marriage, to me, it just means something. And it means something to how you handle conflict. And I'll drop it now, but that was, and thinking more upon it, I didn't really have a problem during the movie because it all made sense to me, but I don't think it should make sense to me if we're looking at a true marriage. It's almost, I feel duped. You know what I mean? I feel like it's like insincere, but I'll leave that be.
Would you prefer like a hypothetical version of the movie where, let's say it was structured differently, or it was longer maybe, and basically you had a sense, it builds an investment in the marriage basically, right? Like let's say the letter comes in the midpoint. Let's say you see them together and you see how good they are, and you see how much they love each other, and you see all this, so you grow to like them and like them together, so that when they see them break apart, it's more heartbreaking. Is that the version you would prefer, or?
or if they got married later in life, you know, like the main conceit of the movie is like 45 years, right? But we can't feel those 45 years. The only attempt it makes to give us any understanding of their marriage, and you know, that's a true commitment, a lifelong commitment. And to me, it feels like the husband is so non-committal and the wife is so insecure that it really does feel like kind of a strained 2-year relationship, or like a 7-year civic union. Like, it does not, whatever those are called, but it just, yeah, I'll leave it there. I do think this movie is really good. You know, if you, sometimes I get lost in the trees, but if you look and you see how we never really can know another person, and I think that's kind of like you become paranoid throughout this movie, and I think that's so contagious, right? If you really think about it, it's like trying not to think about blinking, but if you truly think about the fact that we can't know anybody else, we only know ourselves, and even then we barely know ourselves, because we don't know the things that people hold back, and people, you know, we don't know their understanding of the world or how they perceive us truly. We have this kind of very summarized, clean, embossed version, and it's hard to connect that way, and that can feel derealizing, right? So I think that movie really, it builds on the derealization, and that's where, like, this movie thrives off of atmosphere, the cloudy, the overcast skies, the kind of, you know, mix of the bucolic with this feeling of dread, you know, the East Anglian countryside. I think they're in Norwich, I believe, if I had to guess. And it really does that so well. But anyways, I'm kind of rambling. But your question about the end, I will just answer on my end. I think we're meant to understand. And then again, it's like throughout the movie, like you said, we're meant to understand scenes in a certain way. So at the end, if there is any ambiguity, I don't see any room for it, because it seems very clear cut that the message is this marriage will never be the same because of the preceding incidents. So the preceding events of the last 5 days, or maybe the message is she'll never be the same, but they'll continue moving forward. Either way, it's very sad, profoundly sad. And, you know, you can't help but feel for them, because regardless of any sort of mimetic qualities, I think these characters are, you know, you can feel them. You can feel the real people inside of these characters. The human qualities, right? So I think it's really well done in that respect.
Yeah, I'll say the ending in particular, I really like the ending. And I think that one thing that makes it, that really compounds the tragedy of it, is with that speech by the husband, where we see that he loves her. Like, he really does love her, which is kind of like a cathartic, I think, payoff, you know, because there is sort of this, I think, ambiguity, a larger ambiguity hanging over the movie, where it's like, well, how much does he actually love her? Was he truly just like settling for this woman? Or was it like, is he actually really like being with her? And he like, no, like there is a real love there that's been fostered and grown over the years. It just happens to be the second most intense love he's had in his life, right? And it's like, is she going to be able to accept that? Is that good enough for her? And the answer, I think, at least at where the movie leaves us, is no, which I think is sad, because I'm like, I don't think that's wrong. I honestly don't think that's unreasonable. I totally understand. Like, I get it. Like, I can understand being her and feeling like, no, I don't want to be the second choice. I don't want that for myself. I deserve more than that, right?
Is there like, we keep talking about her being the second most, but is that necessarily true, or is it merely the fact that, like, I think he had this incident, or he had the girl, he had the possible life before her when she dies, and is it possible that this is just merely this long extended question, this open question he's had all these years, that's kind of haunted him? Of course, there's no sense of closure, and the moment he gets it is finally the time he could grieve, which is why he grieves over those 4 days. And over those handful of days, as he's kind of grieving, he reverts back to what he was when he was young, and when he probably lost her, and when he probably met Kate, which is the smoker, the kind of like, whatever, the way she describes him, the way she's
politically aggressive.
Yeah, exactly. And the moment is I think when he gives that speech, it's not necessarily, or it is true, I think that he actually does love her, but it's the realization that he did love her over those 45 years and didn't realize it till then. And that's actually what upsets Kate more so, which is not that she's necessarily the second or anything, but that she recognized it for 45 years and he didn't. At least I think in the logic of the movie.
Yeah. That's tragic too. Like the idea that like it was like one thing that one person didn't appreciate what they had while it was good. Those were the good, supposedly the good years, right? We're meant to assume.
I just have a quick reading that I remembered that kind of flashed in my head. This movie, obviously we're talking about age, right? Age as well. So the death of youthful ideas, youthful ambition, how we look back on our lives and whether or not we are satisfied or dissatisfied. And it kind of transcends who you choose as a partner. And I think that's like the whole purpose of the fact that we're meant to feel that he had an unsatisfying career, right? We're meant to feel that he was like a public works employee, which there's nothing wrong with that, but he seems to feel a certain way about that. We saw him almost with Katya as a dreamer, right? As someone who had big plans. That's what I'm meant to feel. And, looking at it from a textual like analysis standpoint, I think you heard the wife's girlfriend say, what is it about men that they think about their legacy so often? So I think he's not just thinking about Katya, he's thinking about his life in general and how it's gone. And to me, that should be even maybe more salient is the idea that maybe he wanted children at one point, or maybe he wanted something else in his career. And I don't know if anybody else got that feeling that it wasn't just about Katya. And so all these memories of the potential and the possible are kind of being washed up or washed ashore for him from his subconscious. And he's starting to process those things. And yeah, it just felt like he was back in his youth and realizing that this is not how he wanted his life to go. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's because he's with the wrong woman, but it's because of all these other decisions that maybe are inferred but not explicitly described, excepting the job choice. I don't know.
And that's why I think the pregnancy reveal is so powerful. And I think it has such significant implications for the rest of the story, is that like at one time he did want kids. We pretty much know that, yes, he wanted to like have kids with this woman, or at least a kid. Right. And it's kind of implied that, Kate's looking back kind of thinking like, well, we never had, like maybe thinking like maybe we could have had kids, like not like, wow, I wish I had kids, but like, like we could have and we didn't, and that's one of the things you think about when you're an older person, when that window closes, sometimes you think back and wonder. And you can imagine a conversation they'd had at one point where he said, I don't really want kids. And she wasn't going to force him to have kids with her. And it's sort of like, that is one of those things that's so like, it's so destabilizing. It's so like the idea that you've compromised for this other person and you only realize later, like, because she probably believed he never wanted kids. Because he's like, I've just never been someone who wanted kids. And then she's like, oh no, he was lying to me about that. Incredibly significant thing, because that was the easier thing to do. Like that to me. And also the other thing about that too that's painful is like that to me is so true. That's so real. Like that is a thing people do. Like that is a thing that happens every day. And it is so like it is such a awful thing.
So what happens every day?
No, the idea of like making compromises, or the idea that like there's a person that like, and they don't explain their reason for it. And like, and another thing, to me, like their dynamic and their interactions to me feel very authentic. That's why part of why I can buy like everything they do. And like the thing too about like the dinner, like the lunch with his friends from work, or he's like, he doesn't want to go, which first of all, I get that. Her being like, you really ought to go because you said you'd go, which I have said that. I have been that person. I have been the kind of nagging, like, you got to honor your commitments, whatever, for sure. And then him like, okay, I'll go, but I won't like it. And I've been that person too. Like, there's a lot of like little textural details in this movie that just feel very, or the friend that loves the ukulele. Like, I don't know. To me, like there's, while it's minimal, it's filled in with an abundance of like.
Am I the friend that loves the ukulele, Tony?
I'm the friend that loves the ukulele.
Playing the jaw harp.
Justin Guitar.
I felt a little called out. I felt a little bit like an old person watching this movie, I have to say.
All right. Well, I think we can probably pivot into voting and final thoughts. I haven't kept a really good run of the time, but it's probably been enough. I'm going to start with Kirk, who apparently liked this movie, but I'm not sure how.
Oh, no. I reacted strongly to this movie, and I apologize if I was too effusive, but I will give it a yes. I did enjoy this movie for nothing more than the fact that it made me feel these very painful, raw emotions that are uncomfortable to feel and that linger after the viewing. I think even the subtle things like how he's always hated Jack Kerouac, but then we realize that maybe the reason he hated Jack Kerouac is because this Italian tour guide or German tour guide reminded him of Jack Kerouac. And it's like maybe an inside joke they had, or like a running gag they had. Their whole marriage was kind of conceived on this mountaintop. And that's in and of itself is like, oh, that's so disheartening and gross. And yeah, this is a sad fucking movie, and it kind of made me really depressed, but it's very good. And I think it owes its quality to the mimetic aspect and just the quality of the craft. And I will give it a recommend and a thumbs up. And my complaints, it's just sometimes it's fun to complain. I don't necessarily buy all aspects of I know it's a movie, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Why don't we go to Anthony then?
All right. Well, let's see. One thing I wanted to bring up, but it was sort of outside the scope of what we were talking about until Kirk brought it up towards the end, was the underlying economic situation of the movie, which I really liked, which is about his job and stuff, and how they're probably former like labor type voters who were stuck in the kind of these union type jobs that no longer exist. Because my favorite conversation in the movie is when he brings up those books on climate change, and he says we got to start doing more, which is kind of ridiculous, like as if they could actually finally avert things, when the reality is they should have been doing more for 45 plus years. And Kate looks at him and is like, well, we recycle. And he's like, do we? And she's like, well, I try to, which I thought was the most realistic and best conversation in the movie.
But you never put it in the right bin. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that point. So I'm going to actually do something. I'm going to say I wouldn't recommend this movie, I think, because it is depressing. It is hard, I think. But I'll give it a soft yes for Tony.
Wow.
Wow.
I never thought I'd live to see the day. Listen, guys, this is historic. The hate star has evaporated.
Tony is anti-Katya. It's confirmed.
Yeah. And as for me, again, like I stand by my criticism that like the kind of thing we saw at the end when the husband, gets up and gives her breakfast in bed and whatever, and we think maybe things are going to go better. That, for example, is the kind of motion or the kind of reversal or plot dynamic that I would have liked to have seen. I know it feels a little inappropriate for such a naturalistic movie, but I think there just could have been a little bit more going on. I felt not particularly surprised. I think there is the issue of the pregnancy. That is another element, but I think there could have just been a few more turns in the action of the plot. I know, like, what do I want this to be, like a Marvel, like movie? Do I want this to have like all kinds of twists and turns, but I just wish it maybe had more of a structure to it and a little bit more going on. But I can't knock it because like these feelings that we're having, we're really talking, we're doing exactly what the movie wants us to do, right? Which is to really think about these things and getting into, the granularity of how we would feel in this situation and analyzing all the details of their lives. And, I think it's a total success in that respect. I just might not put it into the 706.
That's fine. I am so surprised it made it in, honestly, from our discussion. The tenor of our discussion, did not see it going that way at all. I thought I was going to get 3 no's.
I think it was a smart order. If Connor would have went second and said yes, I probably would have done no.
Tony, very good.
I
would have said yes regardless. So yeah, that's.
Well, I hope you guys got something out of this movie. I just think it's like, I think there's something I remember seeing. I saw it last year and it just like affected me. It just kind of stuck with me. And just like, it's a movie I think about sometimes. And I've never seen this precise. I mean, Anthony said it's a kind of an MFA story, which I can buy, but like, I don't know. I haven't seen this story done on film in this way. And I haven't seen this story, and just like the fact that it's about old people, the fact that there's a sex scene with old people, like that's why I like, no, but like stuff like that. No, but like, that's cool to see. Like it's a part of life that's not represented all that often in movies. And I think that that's important and kind of cool. So for all those reasons, that's why I think it's good. I'm glad it made it in. Without further ado, we will go to the portion where my co-hosts will recommend a movie for next week, and I get to pick from the three. So who went least recently? Do we know?
It was
I
Connor.
believe it's me.
All right.
And I will vote to go first.
Oh.
And then Anthony, and then Kirk. Okay, guys, it's a new year, coming out swinging, not messing around. Kurosawa,
Knew it.
trying to get another Kurosawa movie into the list. I'm running out, honestly. I'm running out of movies that I truly love by Kurosawa. I've given you all of my favorite gems. I've suggested all of them. All of them have been denied. Of course, in the background, I was thinking of, well, first I recommended Hidden Fortress. You guys went for that one. Sure, you took a chance. Didn't love it, but I thought about how I made the case to you for that film, and I compared it to Star Wars. I said, guys, Star Wars is going to come out. We better watch Hidden Fortress. Of course, you guys, the conversation, nothing was really added to the conversation by Star Wars, but I guess I have to have the Star Wars connection for you guys to get my movie picked. So I've just watched Mandalorian season 2. It's very heavy in references to, of course, the film Yojimbo, this classic film, right, by Kurosawa, the coolest Kurosawa film, a total classic of the samurai genre, with just an incredible score and an indelible, unforgettable Toshiro Mifune iconic performance. So I'm going to suggest Yojimbo, 1961. Of course, tongue in cheek. I know you guys aren't going for the Star Wars connection. It's just a reference to Hidden Fortress. I saw the parallelism there.
So I'm going to nominate America's Kurosawa. Robert Altman movie. I don't know if that's actually a comparison usually made, but no, I'm going to nominate.
Cool. I like it.
I did last time, I think, a Western. I'm going to stick to the same decade, same genre, and nominate Robert Altman's Western, McCabe and Mrs. Miller from 1971. It's a fantastic film. It's the only Robert Altman movie I've ever actually liked. It stars Warren Beatty and Julie Christie. Essentially just tells a story of this kind of decrepit Deadwood era style town in kind of mining Pacific Northwest, as the two of them sort of start a brothel. And it's a movie of which we sort of see a guy who's realizing that all the selfish actions he made in his life are getting ready to haunt him and come back to kind of doom him. And the movie kicks off from there. It has a great Leonard Cohen soundtrack, not made for the movie, but utilized perfectly. One of the greatest soundtrack usage I've ever seen. So, McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Nice. Kirk?
You guys are coming out firing, man. I'm going to go with a little 1926 film noir. No, let's see. How about Munich? It's a great movie. We haven't had a Spielberg in.
That's true.
Munich's an interesting one. It was kind of a zag in Spielberg's career, if you look at it. It was more more granular, right? And it kind of was circling back to Schindler's List, and also it's a really interesting dichotomy where you have the kind of the militarism of the state of Israel juxtaposed with its history of oppression and victimization and genocide, and also kind of the theological components, like being a religious state. I don't know if it's formally a religious state, but in effect, I think there's obviously some cognitive dissonance there as well. Like, are we upholding Talmud? Our characters from Footnote would have something to say about the movie Munich for sure. And I think Israel is a fascinating country in that respect. And also, it stars Hector of Troy, one Eric Bana, the true Incredible Hulk. His role was stolen by Edward Norton, and then subsequently Mark Ruffalo. So, it's a good one. It's bloody, it's messy, it's a very kind of fun ride. So not fun, but you know what I mean. Anyways.
All right. Shall we rebut? So I have nothing to say against the other movies. Obviously, Yojimbo, it's a certain kind of thing. And I'm not, totally insistent. I think, Tony should choose the movie that's best. I felt good, right? Sure, I haven't gone for a while. That maybe is a point in my favor, but I totally would be interested in seeing either of these movies, particularly McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I've already seen it, and I didn't love it. I felt it hard to access, like a lot of Altman stuff, I just didn't. But there were aspects of it that I found really interesting, and it's a movie that I would love to watch. I think if I were ever to watch McCabe and Mrs. Miller again, I'd want it to be with Anthony, because I think him in particular could have a very cool read of it. Not that I know what that would be. And as for Munich, I'm interested in it. It's an interesting topic, but of course, what I would say is I'd be worried. I'm a little bit nervous about how Spielberg is going to take on a topic, like, for instance, right, Israel and, violence against Israel and Israel's reaction to that violence. And I'm afraid, Spielberg, known as the master of kind of, not emotional manipulation, but of a certain art of filmmaking to arouse sympathy. I'm kind of worried, but I'm also very curious. I've always been interested in that movie, so I would be really interested in either of these. And Yojimbo, it's this old samurai movie that has a lot of style. Certainly, it's very influential. I think a lot of you probably have seen it, or seen things that are related to it. So it could be cool to return to. And I'll say that it's still very fresh. It still has so much style and kind of class that it's still really fun to watch, I would say, more than Hidden Fortress.
Okay, so we're starting the first nominations of 2021 with some household names, I think. So yeah. You're good, golden with that any way you choose. I haven't seen either of these movies, actually, Connor or Kirk's. So that's a point in their favor. Connor has been dying to do Kurosawa for the last 5 years. So that's a point there. I don't know if I have a cool reading of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, but, I kind of have thoughts and ideas I'd love to kind of work through. I think, though, we were joking a few weeks ago about the kind of movies that we all like and stuff. And I think, Tony, there's a version of a sort of movie about the sense of entrapment, the idea that the decisions you made long before are ready to trap you. I think that's built into this movie, and I think it's something you'd latch onto. I think Connor and Kirk would be fascinated by the sort of history of it, the sort of history of the Americana. Kirk would jump at the sort of gender dynamics and other topics there as well. So I think that could be interesting. I haven't seen Kirk's movie, so I don't know. I don't know anything about it. Other than
audiences at home, Kirk is wearing a shirt that just says "I love gender." So
fan.
Exactly. And when I nominated Munich, of course, I'm coming at it. I'm not, for anybody, lest anybody cast any aspersions on my ideologies. I am this time siding with the Israelis. Dubious accusations and frivolous anti-Semitic lawsuits that I've had to endure. No, just kidding. Let's see. I'm actually surprised neither of you have seen Munich. I'm almost 100% sure Tony's seen it.
I have not seen it. Sorry, I don't know what you were saying. I have not seen it.
You have seen it, Tony?
No, not seen it.
My goodness. Okay. Well, maybe, there is merit there, I think, really. I would love to hear what you guys think of Munich. It's unlike any other Spielberg work I've seen. I don't know if I've seen all of them, but I've seen all the important ones. So, yeah, I think there's some merit there. Yeah, the movie about James Dean getting accosted on the street by a Southern cracker called Yo Jimbo. It's an interesting film. And then of course, Andrew McCabe and Robert Miller, the detailing, chronicling of the Russia hoax. It's a great movie. A little soon, though. I thought they rushed it. But I'm interested in Munich. I'm interested in rewatching it. I haven't watched it in probably 3 or 4 years. It's really good. You see some pubic hair. That's always a bonus. That's just my little maraschino cherry for Tony. And, yeah, we should give Eric Bana his due. Talk about a man who's just been exiled. But go ahead, Tony.
Kirk, just because you're mad we didn't pick the Lev Parnas biopic doesn't mean that we hold it against him. All right. Okay. Maybe this means I'm a rube. I'm easily cowed. Connor played the tiny violin at the very beginning, working up the strings, working up the sympathy. These are all really strong choices, actually. These are all really, I would love to do an episode on any of these. And, again, I hope that you guys feel comfortable suggesting them again in the future. But I do feel bad for Connor ultimately because he really, really does want a Kurosawa in there. I feel like we kind of haven't given him his due. I feel like there's so many Kurosawa movies to choose from, and I want it to be one Connor loves. So I would love to. I think we got to do your Jimbo. We got to throw Connor a bone.
Sure.
And you can go another.
I was worried. Oh, I feel like I've overplayed my hand a little bit. Now I feel a little bad. But
and now in 10 years he can suggest another Kurosawa if he wants.
Yeah.
Put him in timeout for a long
This
time.
is my last chance to get him in. This is a big deal. So I'll have to. My arguments will have to be. Everything will have to be just right. Also for your guys' viewing experience.
Yeah.
This is my big chance. Thank you,
So
Tony.
if we don't vote it in next week, we all agree that Kurosawa sucks.
Kurosawa is actually being held hostage right now, and he will be killed if we don't vote it in. So no, but Kurosawa now joins David Fincher as the second director with multiple attempts. We'll see. Fincher, both of them were shot down. So we'll see if
we voted no on a Zodiac.
Zodiac didn't make it.
Okay.
I think I was the only one who voted yes. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys as always. I hope you feel really good and uplifted by 45 years. And I look forward to talking about the movie about the Simpsons character Jimbo next week. So, Anthony, why don't you take us away?
I'll have what she's having.